with Michel Drumgold, who is an MA student at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara. Sorry. Who will excuse me, speak about the geopolitics of migration in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, a regional buffer zone, or a regional holding zone.
Good afternoon. So, since the creation of Transjordan and throughout the kingdom's history, Jordan's political, geographical, and territorial base has served predominantly as a regional buffer, or a land between, in promoting regional and international stability, but it has never really been a power center itself. As a result of the Middle East's historical and modern-day conflicts, such as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Middle East's importance in the Cold War, the Iraq-Iran War, the Gulf War, the 2003 Iraq War, and the current Syrian civil war and ISIS conflict, as well as Jordan's status as a geopolitical land beyond such conflict in the region, the kingdom serves as a safe haven and in some ways a holding zone for a lot of the refugees from the region. This is reflected in the kingdom's current demographics. Out of a population of about 6 million, 2/3 of that population in Jordan have Palestinian ethnic origins. As well, the number of Iraqis in Jordan has surged since 2003, and Syrian and Iraqi refugees continue to flow across the borders every day. And the 18-month-old Zatari refugee camp on the border of Syria is now the country's 4th largest city. So the implications of migration in the region have been crucial for Jordan in changing both the demographics, and the placement of the country in the region is one of the main reasons as to why Jordan has this role as a buffer zone. So I'll be looking a little bit at geopolitics, but also looking at how this geopolitical placement of Jordan in the region has affected the refugee populations. And then we'll look at more of what this means today, what the modern day consequences of this will be. So the current geopolitical situation in Jordan has a lot to do with following the aftermath of the Iraq War. Right now, the main fear is that Jordan will become a regional security vacuum. This fear has only increased with the December 2011 US withdrawal from Iraq and remains heightened due to the risk of the Syrian and Iraqi conflicts spilling into Jordan's border. Jordan is really seeking regional support and stability, and this is evident, for example, in Jordan's request for membership in the GCC, showing that they're now moving away from getting international support, for example, from the United States, and looking more for regional support from the GCC and other countries in the region. The aim of this paper is to address how Jordan's refugee policy reflects the state's regional geopolitical role as a buffer zone, as well as to overview and theorize the modern-day geopolitical consequences that migration have in Jordan, both internally as well as regionally, and then also at the international level. So these encompass the two main research questions that I'll examine. Although Jordan is a small nation in the region and doesn't necessarily serve as a prime mover or have a prime role in the Arab world, it has very clearly strategic location in the region and is an essential political mediator, moderator, and middle ground in the Middle East. However, the kingdom's regional and international status as a mediator right now is at a possible point of juncture because regional conflicts and neighboring states' policies are contributing to Jordan's growing number of refugees and are threatening to tip Jordan's own internal demographic stability. And if Jordan's regional internal stability tips, there's a possibility that this could also be linked with the entire region's stability overall. Therefore, considering Jordan's role in the region is both timely and relevant, particularly in looking at the intersections between Jordan as a buffer zone and as a haven for refugees in the region. So first, I'd like to give a little bit of demographic overview. It should be noted most of these are all taken on estimated statistics because the exact number of refugees and the exact number of people with different Palestinian background, for example, is not very well known. Due to Jordan's geopolitical location as a buffer and a land beyond the region's conflicts, Jordan has historically provided a safe haven for regional refugees. As a result of the Israeli-Arab Wars in 1948 and 1967, and the more recent intifadas and Jordan's border sharing with Israel and the West Bank, Jordan has been the regional country most impacted by the outpouring of Palestinian refugees. Following the Gulf War, Jordan again faced a re-influx of its own refugees from Kuwait, and since 2003, an estimated 750,000 Iraqi refugees have sought refuge in Jordan, as well as 600,000 Syrian refugees who have entered Jordan since 2011. So if we look at the overall population of Jordan, it's estimated at 6 million. 2/3 of those are estimated to be Palestinians. So 1.7 million are Palestinian refugees, still living, many of them in refugee camps. Another 1.5 million have Palestinian descent, but are Jordanian citizens. And as I've just mentioned, there are also 750,000 Iraqi refugees, and Syrian refugees number 600,000. So actually the population of Jordan, estimated at 6 million, really has about 1.4 million Jordanians that do not consider themselves to be Palestinian ethnically. So this is just to demonstrate how large, not the problem, but how large the demographics are being changed and impacted by the refugee crises in the region. So first I'd like to go through an overview of each of the refugee and the Palestinian, Iraqi, Syrian refugees in Jordan, and then to look at the modern day consequences of these refugees in Jordan and what that means for the country, for the region, and for the globe, for the international community. So, as I mentioned, an estimated 2/3 of Jordan's population is Palestinian. Many Palestinians have Jordanian citizenship and actually equal rights, but many of them still face discrimination, particularly as the divide between East Bank Jordanians, people who originally were in the territory of Transjordan, and West Bank Palestinians who have come into Jordan since the 1948 crisis, is often emphasized, and so there's not actually a feeling of unity among the Palestinians living in Jordan. As a direct result of the 1948 conflict, between 70,000 and 132,000 Palestinian Arab refugees were living in Jordan in 1949. And many of these, in 1955, 7 years later, were still receiving monthly food rations from the UN agencies, and Jordan was suffering to cope with the number of refugees who were entering the country in the 1940s and 50s. The 1967 war only further strained the resources of the kingdom, and the conflict placed an additional 1.3 million refugees into the kingdom, or into the region in general, and about 270,000 of those settled in Jordan. And at this time, Jordan was trying to deal with the needs of the refugees, while at the same time becoming increasingly concerned with its own security in the region, particularly with the rise of Al-Fatah, and headed by Yasser Arafat, which became based in Jordan after the 1967 war. During the first years of the Al-Aqsa Intifada, as many as 200,000 Palestinian refugees again fled to Jordan. And as I mentioned before, this is very significant in drawing the distinction between East Bankers and Jordanian Palestinians. Although the Gulf War didn't have a direct impact in putting Gulf residents from the Gulf as refugees in Jordan, the Gulf War is significant in showing the regional implications of refugee crises. Many of the Palestinian refugees had gone to Kuwait and other Gulf states to work in the 1980s, and the Gulf War resulted in 300 to 350,000 Palestinians returning to Jordan, and there they were again unable to find unemployment and unable to receive assistance. So this is significant. Clearly the numbers don't add up, as you can see, but showing that each of these conflicts has had a massive contribution to the wave of migrants coming to Jordan and seeking refuge there, and that today we have about 3.2 million Palestinian refugees as well as Jordanian Palestinians living in Jordan. This brings us up to the more recent conflicts, looking at the Iraq War and the current Syrian and ISIS crises. Since Jordan is not an adoptee of the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, the reality for Iraqi refugees in Jordan is very different from that of Palestinian refugees. For example, Iraqis can be granted temporary asylum for 6 months, which is renewable. However, if it isn't renewed, they become illegal aliens and can be fined or deported. And oftentimes it isn't renewed because there are fears of forced deportation. Throughout the 1990s, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis began fleeing Iraq, and by 1995, Iraqis also journeyed to Jordan, and by 1996, there were an estimated 100,000 Iraqis settling in Jordan. This group was mainly a privileged group of businessmen and former government officials who were bringing capital with them and settling in urban areas, so they weren't necessarily settling, they were very seldom settling in refugee camps. Up to the 2003 Iraq War, the estimates were about 250 to 350,000 refugees in Jordan, and only 30,000 were legally registered, which brings to a problem of giving aid to those individuals, as well as managing who is in the country and ensuring that everyone can be employed. So with the outbreak of the 2003 war, Jordan adopted a policy of allowing Iraqi refugees in as guests. But this also is problematic because the Iraqis coming into Jordan were not labeled as refugees, which can be more positive that there's not a stigmatization of them as refugees. However, it means that Jordanian officials didn't request foreign or international aid, which means that the government itself was trying to deal with the costs of having these guests in their country, as well as having problems with finding work and employment for the guests as they were there. This has remained the same recently, that by mid-2007, the number of refugees has increased to estimated 700,000 to 1 million. And again, very few of those are documented residents. The consequences of this Iraqi refugee influx are many. For example, there's now a black market in which Iraqis work longer hours for lower wages. The housing shortage, particularly in Amman, is very, very big problem. And there's also been an increase in rent prices. Additionally, health and education services are very, very strained. This is particularly a problem for many of the refugees who need to have access to health services, particularly psychological health services. And these services they're not able to get in Jordan that would be sufficient to meet the need. So right now, we have the next wave of refugees entering Jordan, looking mostly at the Syrian and ISIS refugees who are now crossing into the borders of Jordan. This has now become the main concern, and particularly not necessarily in dealing with the refugees, but also in looking at security concerns. As so many people are entering into the country every day, Jordan is also a threat for becoming its own breeding ground for terrorism or for other groups of extremist groups. So that is one of the main concerns now. And again, there has been even more strain on water, electricity, housing, schools, healthcare, and food. This is a problem for people who are living in refugee camps, but it is even more of a problem for people living outside of the camps because they often are not able to get the aid that they need. Jordan's growing inability to effectively respond to refugee needs has become evident in its recent tightening of border restrictions and denying entry to unaccompanied men, to Palestinian refugees from Syria, to people lacking identity documents, and to Iraqi refugees living in Syria. So there's now a lot more restrictions on who can come into the country, and as well, since October 1st, according to a recent New York Times article. Since October 1st, no more Syrians have entered Jordan in the last 15 days. So this is due as a direct result of the ISIS conflict and concerns that the groups coming in to Jordan might be at risk for breeding terrorism. Here is a quick map just for you to get an idea of the country. We have Jordan. The two main camps in the north of the country are the Syrian camps, which are in the borders of Jordan. The top one is Zotari, the biggest camp, and there's also another one. And then you can see there's also a camp inside the border of Iraq. So now I'd like to briefly outline the modern-day consequences of the refugee influx into Jordan. So first, we have the internal concerns. As I've mentioned, security and stability of the country internally are now the biggest concerns. Additionally, infrastructure concerns, as I've mentioned. The economic strain on the country is huge, particularly as most of the Syrians and Iraqis are facing unemployment. But additionally, many of the Palestinians who already have been living in Jordan are also facing unemployment. So as you can expect, this has now led to a very high disdain from Jordanian citizens for new groups of refugees as they enter, because the new groups of refugees are seen as taking away resources that the Jordanians and the Palestinian Jordanians have a right to have. Regionally, this goes back a little bit again to the geopolitical placement of Jordan. The regional conflicts of the Middle East continue to have an impact on Jordan's internal stability, and there's a fear that Jordan will become a regional security vacuum. And if you look at the map, there's Syria and Iraq in the north and northeast of the country, which are both having major civil wars and conflicts. In the west, there's the Israeli-Palestine conflict, which has been throughout history very unstable and is often emerging again as a threat for sending more refugees into the country. And in the southwest, Egypt, which has now become more stabilized, but is also not necessarily extremely stable in the region. Internationally, this is very significant because it demonstrates the extent of the Middle East refugee crisis. The crisis is something that is recent and that is going on now, but it is something also that has been going on since the states were created in the 1920s and since the 1940s and 50s. And the causes of the exodus of the refugees has not necessarily been addressed. There's also the risk of a continued Arab Spring, looking at instability and radicalism. As well, from a Western perspective, Western interests remain at risk in the region. And as I began at the beginning of the presentation, many question whether the stability of Jordan is determinant for this region's stability. So, to conclude, although Jordan is often overlooked in discussions of the modern Middle East, the region's conflicts and its security, Jordan remains a historic place of safety, security, and stability in a region characterized by violence and war. As a result, this historic role, particularly of Jordan serving as a geopolitical safe haven for the region's refugees, must not be underestimated. Today, as the future continuation of Jordan in this historic role of a regional stabilizer comes under question, the extent of Jordan's regional geopolitical significance as a land of transit and as a buffer and a safe haven country since the state's inception in 1921 becomes increasingly evident. As the conflicts in Jordan's neighboring states rage on, the importance of Jordanian internal stability in order to maintain regional stability is becoming more and more evident. So therefore, the future role of the kingdom remains uncertain, whether it will be a border, a buffer, a land beyond or between, or that it will function in a new role remains to be unseen. Only time will tell what the future geopolitical importance of the Kingdom of Jordan will be. But I think that in looking at regional stability, we should perhaps give a little bit more emphasis in Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll now listen to the presentation of Taner Doğan, who is a PhD candidate at the City University of London, who provided you with a new title, so it's not exactly the one you have in the program. It's called The Process from Social Movement to Political Party and the Impact of the New Geopolitical Dynamics on Society.
With the collapse of the Soviet Empire in the late 1980s, Eastern Europe was westernized, and what Francis Fukuyama called the liberal idea, which means the combination of the rule of law, liberal democracy, and market capitalism, called the liberal idea, the combination of the rule of law, liberal democracy, and market capitalism emerged as the basis of a truly global order. Notions such as rationalism, secularism, individualism, and equality and empathy between humans were in the epicenter of the European countries. Moreover, the support of Western states and companies accentuated liberalism as the dominant value system of the new global hegemony. So when the Arab uprisings began in the Middle East in the beginning of 2011, a new chapter has opened with regard to social and religious issues. As in the Soviet Empire experience, it was a new opportunity for countries ruled by dictatorships to open its face towards the globalized world. More precisely, this was the term for the Islamists who were waiting for decades to gain power. As in the example of the AKP in Turkey, who formed a moderate and reformist party and supported secularism, democracy, and pro-Western foreign policy. Nahda in Tunisia and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was following the same path when they gained power. Islamists' new approach to politics emphasized the change in their social and religious ideologies and were therefore described as post-Islamists. Although a coup d'etat directed against Morsi has slowed down this process in Egypt, one could observe the first signals of pragmatic policies that comprehended pluralistic democracy in politics and neoliberalism in economics. Especially these two notions led the AKP to a more moderate and liberal Islam understanding of the society in the last 12 years. Consequently, the 9/11 events and the Arab uprisings in the Middle East were a new era of integrating the Muslim world into the global system, which still affects the religious and social understanding of Muslims that can be considered as an opportunity, but also as a challenge. In researching the new geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East, social movements and parties need to be covered in order to understand their role and impact in current events. In particular, 21st century's tableau of the political landscape in the Middle East can only be understood by looking at the background idea of the foundations of Islamist social movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Nahda in Tunisia, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Milli Görüş in Turkey. Furthermore, the transformation from social movement to a political party is another crucial point worth exploring while discussing the shift of ideological identity to more pragmatist approaches. In Globalization and Social Movements, Muqaddam presents three kinds of social movements, especially those after the capitalism and neoliberal globalization: the women's movement, political Islam, and the global justice movement. She associates social movements with capitalism and modernity. As for her, the increase of Islamist movements started at the beginning of the 1980s. She distinguishes Islamist movements as ones that are moderate and extremist, whereas moderate movements engage in non-violent fields such as politics and civil society. Extremist groups are focused on violence through illegal means if the political system is anti-Islamic, westernized, and dictatorial for them. Muqaddam mentions the Muslim Brotherhood, AKP, Islah of Yemen, and Morocco's PGD as some of the movements and parties in the moderate category. Pakulski defines social movements as recurrent patterns of collective activities which are partially institutionalized, value-oriented, and anti-systemic in their form and symbolism. Furthermore, Turner and Killian talk about three different kinds of movements: value-oriented, power-oriented, and participation-oriented. Accordingly, differentiating between these approaches is important to examine the evolution in the society. The transformation from social movement to political party is an important focus that brings out significant changes. The difference between acting as an opposition and as a governing party is an understandable example for this reality. In the case of Turkey, when Erdogan and his crew left Erbakan's party and founded the AKP in 2001, the main difference could be seen in their discourse. During that time, Erdogan veered away from Islamist discourse and policy. When they found the new party in Turkish politics, they emphasized global values such as democracy, human rights, and rule of law. Moreover, they positioned AKP as a moderate, reformist, business-oriented party of the center-right and supported secularism, democracy, and Turkey's traditional pro-Western foreign policy, particularly the goal of EU membership. In 2002 parliamentary elections, AKP's slogan, "Everything is for Turkey," is an important example how universal the new party in Turkish politics was. This slogan was referring to universality of human rights, the Copenhagen criteria, freedom of thought and expression, and freedom to economic enterprise. Beside pragmatic policies, AKP can be characterized as national and spiritual in cultural themes, pluralist democrat in politics, and liberal in economics. Nevertheless, this did not stop the Western media from portraying the AKP as Islamist, Islamic, or moderate Islamist. But the AKP, however, insisted on branding themselves as conservative Democrats. The EU membership was on top of AKP's agenda. Erdogan described the democratization process in Turkey as a silent revolution, which was a result of the EU reform packages. In particular, between 2002 and 2004, AKP focused on demilitarization of civilian public institutions, progress on the rule of law, minority rights, and decentralization to fasten the EU membership. The democratization process of the AKP led especially the US to show the AKP as a model for the Muslim world. In addition, Eligür claims that one of the AKP's aims was to support the Greater Middle East Initiative founded by the Bush administration in 2004, which supported the democracy and open market economics in the Muslim world. This is another fact why the US put Turkey forward as a role model. US approach to the AKP in relation with the Greater Middle East Initiative was interpreted as White House backs moderate Islamism. In domestic politics, AKP comprised corruption, unemployment, the unequal distribution of wealth, and decay in moral values, and invested in infrastructure, especially on health and transportation, which brought the success to a local level. However, AKP's success brought a new Muslim bourgeoisie out that has its roots in Anatolia. This new class was the driving force of AKP's silent revolution. Furthermore, two crucial Orientalist themes were challenged by the AKP: Islam and democracy, and Islam and capitalism. These two facts characterize clearly that especially AKP's economic policies was capitalist-oriented. Consequently, the policies of the AKP were pragmatic rather than ideological. Daniel Bromberg describes three types of Islamism. First, radical or militant fundamentalism rejects the use of gradualism and demands the forced imposition of an Islamic state based on all the encompassing Islamic laws, the Sharia. Second, reformist or moderate fundamentalism whose aim is to establish an Islamic state that involves a total reversal of the existing constitutional order. Yet he underlines that these types of movements are moderate in their tactics, typically rejecting violence and trying to build popular support in an electoral framework by seeking alliances from other segments of society. These groups try to capitalize on the pluralistic political environment of liberal democracy, but their all encompassing political projects is based on the replacement of secular constitutional norms. The third category consists of Islamic liberals or strategic modernists which seek to extend religious freedom in a broadly democratic environment. Their ultimate goal is not the creation of an Islamic state, but coexisting with other political projects in a secular, pluralistic order. With regard to the post-9/11 and Arab uprisings, Arab Spring era, the new geopolitical dynamics was pushing the Islamists to focus on the last example. The creation of an Islamic state, the rule of Sharia, or establishing a union between Muslim countries was observed as a threat to the West. This approach has an interesting impact on the society. As in the example of the AKP, new economic steps gave birth to a new bourgeoisie. This process has guided especially the conservative society to deal with interest as a natural process rather than as a religious issue. The perspective observing the world and religion has changed dramatically. Distinguishing between living out the religion in public sphere has evolved into being religious just at home. The religious understanding has increased especially in visual areas. Consequently, the process to political power has increased more secular understanding in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taner. You did more than. It was fairly short, thank you. So we'll have more time for questions at the end. So, third and last presentation by Cengiz Filgi, who is a PhD candidate at the Middle East Technical University, and whose presentation is titled An Analysis of the New Al-Qaeda, Tactics, Threats, and the Intelligence Challenge. Intelligence challenges ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think my voice is loud enough for the whole audience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I will be using a microphone. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome you all to the last session of today. My presentation is going to be, as you can see, about Al-Qaeda now. I'd like to begin with an outline of what's going to be covered in my presentation. Firstly, I will make a brief introduction to why this study has been carried out. And secondly, the reasons behind the change in tactics in Al-Qaeda will be explained. Then what follows will be the main part of the study, which are the new tactics or the strategies maybe. And then the last part will be the intel challenges ahead. And of course, there will be a final conclusion that will bring us to the end of my presentation. Okay, now I'd like to begin my presentation with posing a question, actually a rhetorical question, I would say. Would it be wrong to say that the Al-Qaeda we used to know is no longer the Al-Qaeda? Well, most probably not, because it's quite possible to see a change in the tactics of the organization. The once upon a time suicide bombers are no longer on the stage. Instead, what can be called as small units or small bombers have become more popular, and the most striking examples of these can be seen in Boston, London, and Paris attacks. So at this point, the question that needs to be asked is, how come has the Al-Qaeda shifted from multiple or massive suicide bombers to pressure cooker bombs? And this is what's going to be explained next. Okay, we all know that change is inevitable, and it's not possible to escape it. For the Al-Qaeda, what brought the change was the death of Osama bin Laden. The organization lost its leader, who was the most influential figure, the inspiration, and of course the money source of the organization. And after his death, the organization was left like an orphan who needed to be taken care of, which actually was the reason why it remained silent for some time after bin Laden's death. this time, although its center has been hallowed, Al-Qaeda became more decentralized and the peripheral groups started to take the stage. What can be named as little or smaller Al-Qaedas started to operate. This could be defined as a degradation of the organization, which was even made worse by the counter-terrorist intelligence attempts of the US and especially other cooperation attempts at the international level. However, at this stage, it would be definitely wrong to claim that Al-Qaeda was no longer active. Of course it was active. However, it looked like a shape without a compass. So it had some difficulty trying to get used to the current situation. But then, their new leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, started to employ various strategies and tactics where, as I have mentioned, smaller Al-Qaedas would be much more active than the boss. Of course, the Arab Spring was one of the most influential factors in this change because it did not produce the results which, in a way, prevented the jihadist movement to further on as the Arab Spring focused on more freedom rather than more authority. Consequently, because of the Arab Spring, it couldn't improve itself. But of course, there was one exception, which was the case of Syria. Although the wings of Arab Spring had Syria as well, especially in 2011, it did not yield the desired results. On the contrary, what it produced was a civil war where thousands of innocent people had died, as Bashar al-Assad continued his strong resistance against the desires of the public. What could be seen in the country was the boom of various organizations trying to overthrow him. The Al-Nusra Front, created on January 23rd, 2012, is one of these groups, and it was the most deadly one. Led by Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, the organization aims at overthrowing the Assad government and creating a pan-Islamic state under the rule of Sharia. In this respect, it operated as a branch of Al-Qaeda, and their leader pledged allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri as well. Therefore, the two groups, Al-Qaeda and the Al-Nusra Front, were taking advantage of the situation in Syria because with such an unstable government, it would be much more possible to spread out the jihadist ideas and work for a calming by training more and more terrorists on Syrian soil. Yet, this did not prove to be so easy as thought before, and that was the main reason why they started to employ new tactics and strategies. So let's move on to what these tactics are. I have named them with I have named each strategy with a different thing. And the first one was smaller is bigger, less is more. Although Al-Qaeda was operating on a decentralized basis before, so we know that it was decentralized before, this has gained much more velocity after Bin Laden's death. This stems from the fact that al-Zawahiri was not as effective as a leader as Laden was. And this led to the shrinking of the Al-Qaeda. So, what was observed was the smaller Al-Qaedas, or what can we call that, Al-Qaeda franchises, such as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which of course all helped carry out the organization's missions. Moreover, as mentioned, other groups have also pledged their allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri, and we have Al-Nusra Front in Syria, and of course Al-Shabaab, which was an offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia, following the aim of Sharia. Okay, so let's continue with the second strategy. The second tactic I would like to say is teacher training approach. Due to the growing number of drone strikes taking place in Pakistan, the organization's ability to orchestrate attacks from there. Because formerly, when they were plotting to carry out a catastrophic attack in UK. During the trial, it was found out that these three guys, took a 40-day course in tribal Pakistan, then came back to teach what they had learned there to more and more people, so that the number of attackers would rise. And then here comes my next tactic, which is basically the bombing methods. Now, before we knew that Al-Qaeda was quite proficient and excellent, actually, in carrying out suicide bombers and massive suicide bombers, just like the 9/11 attacks. But then, it's possible to observe a change in this phenomenon, where the organization diverged from using so large-scale events. Now, in the Boston Marathon bombing, the Sakarya brothers used 2 pressure cooker bombs. I mean, you may not believe this, but they were such small that they did the desired effect. They exploded them respectively near the finish line, and this created 3 killed and an estimated of 264 injured. But this was important in the sense that Al-Qaeda was still alive in the United States and will be alive in the United States because there are some people, just like the Sarnaev brothers, who were later found out to believe in defending the Islam from the United States. And my next tactic is the increase in the number of homegrown extremists from much further discovered than a terrorist directly affiliated with a formal organization. These individuals present the greatest challenge from the law enforcement and intelligence perspective because they do not exhibit many of the characteristics or behaviors that have of successfully disrupting and mitigating potential terrorist attacks. Of course, another issue that needs to be taken in this respect is that homegrown terrorist extremists, have started to be trained online, which makes them even harder to recognize. That is, instead of traveling abroad, US-based extremists are becoming radicalized online, since the internet has made it easier for them to access like-minded communities without face-to-face meetings and watch jihadist propaganda from online medias. The issue of homegrown extremists is gaining more and more significance once again. I'd like to mention that. As Rasmussen has pointed out, he is one of the chiefs of one of the research organizations in the United States. As he claims, as we look forward in the years ahead, the threat posed by homegrown violence extremists is the one that causes us to stretch our heads the most. These are the people that live among us, who have gone to the same schools, who attend the same churches, who attend the same health clubs and institutions in our communities. So it's becoming harder to differentiate between, let's say, regular citizen and a homegrown extremist. The next tactic is handing out Teletubbies. Actually, this may seem quite strange, and of course, it may not really seem as a strategy. It's actually true that Al-Qaeda used Teletubbies, these toys, in Syria. In an effort to win the support of the local people in Syria, Al-Qaeda fighters started to hand out Teletubbies to the children of the local public. Although, as I have said, it may not look as a tactic, it's such an effective one because the main aim of the organization is to make the local people sympathize with them and make them feel that their fate is tied to theirs, and they try to win them through the conveniences of modern life, which is a tactic that started to be applied after the failures in Iraq, since they have realized that it's not enough to win a territory and they need to learn how to govern if they want to hold it. strategy, which is actually winning hearts and winning minds, which ironically belong to the US. And my next strategy is titled as Sparing the Muslims. Sparing the Muslims from the attacks and killing the so-called infidels can be observed as a tactic in Al-Qaeda branch in Somalia, Al-Shabaab. In Westgate shopping mall attacks, which took place in Nairobi, Kenya, from September 21st, 2013 to September 24, 2013, the attackers, who turned out to be the members of Al-Shabaab, quizzed the people in the mall with a set of questions related to Prophet Muhammad, and shocked those who were unable to give correct answers and were then considered as infidels and deserved to be treated as such. The rationale behind this type of tactic is actually the lessons, once again, the lessons learned from Iraq. In Iraq, Al-Qaeda killed many Muslims as well, and this created a huge opposition to them from the local public. Therefore, what this new tactic is trying to show is Al-Qaeda's acknowledgement that huge masses of Muslims they have killed is an enormous PR problem within the audience they're trying to reach, and it has started to be seen as a problem that Al-Qaeda groups are really taking efforts to address it. And the last tactic that will be analyzed in this presentation is prison breaks, where Al-Qaeda attacks prisons and frees inmates. The reason behind this tactic is quite simple. According to Abu Bakr al-Ansari, the leaders of the terrorist organization, who possess an ability to formulate ideas and articulate elaborate plans, have been confined in prisons, whether in Algeria, Mauritania, Morocco, or Mali, leaving the organization confused and leaderless. Due to this, Al-Qaeda militants attack the prisons and try to create confusion within the governments, since they're showing that they're able to reach these inside despite the close surveillance. Okay, what follows from this moment on in the presentation are intel challenges or intelligence challenges ahead, and how these challenges can be overcome. I have three important challenges here, which I consider the most crucial. The decentralized structure of the Al-Qaeda, where it's possible to see smaller Al-Qaedas, can be considered as one of the most crucial changes that needs to be addressed. This stems from the fact that it needs definitely further cooperation, further surveillance, as well as further preparedness spreading all over the critical regions of the world, especially the Middle East. As a result, what needs to be done at this point is increasing electronic intel sources, because we have told that I have just mentioned that they're using internet a lot. So SIGINT and putting more human intelligence, which is human at work. Yet, we need to bear in mind that this is a difficult task to achieve, especially in terms of human. So the second is the slow attacks. It's an undeniable fact that 9/11 attacks took place because of the failure of the U.S. intelligence community. Similarly, the Boston attacks also pointed out a failure in terms of analyzing the scale of attacks. The Al-Qaeda is now refraining from such large-scale attacks, and this surely creates a concern with an intel community. As Rogers has stated, the intel community has to worry about such knockoff events like the Boston case, because it's not possible to eliminate homegrown extremists as they're getting online, which is another challenge that will be explained next. In this case, there should be more focus on SIGINT, because the internet has become the most commonly used medium of communication. And the last challenge, I would say, is the communication tactics. Especially with the NSA leaks, Al-Qaeda has resorted to changing their communication tactics, and Al-Qaeda in Yemen has been one of them. And as Winske has claimed, overall, the terrorist organizations and also hostile actors, leaks of this nature serve as a wake-up call to look more closely at how they're operating and improve their security. So the NSA analysts started to refocus actually their attention on terrorists watching their electronic communications, logging all changes, including how which internet sites the terrorist suspects visit, trying to determine what system they might choose to avoid future detection. And in conclusion, I have tried to analyze the shift in tactics at the organization over the last 3 years, especially after Osama bin Laden's death. It can be said that the Al-Qaeda, as I have said before, is no longer the Al-Qaeda we used to know. Though these changes may not be really observable, they constitute a crucial part and crucial strategy of the organization. So they pose new threats for security, especially the use of new tactics like Teletubbies, pressure cooker bombs, and especially homegrown extremists are posing great problems for the security officials as well as the intelligence community. So, as a result, what I can say is one should not be certain that these small attacks, which I will say bit by bit threats, will not be as devastating as the 9/11 attacks. On the contrary, they may do so, but what is crucial at this stage is to increase surveillance and intel cooperation so that another series of catastrophic attacks will not be experienced again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiniz. We now have slightly less than 20 minutes for questions and answer. First, you, yes.
My question will be to the speaker. And on your presentation, you mentioned that Egypt, after the revolution, and Egypt became stabilized. So, but I'm just wondering that how could you explain the reason that after the military coup, Egypt became stabilized? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I didn't mean to imply that Egypt had become stable or not stable, but with relation to Jordan, looking at the other countries surrounding Jordan, Egypt is less of a concern for Jordan now. The number of Egyptians living in Jordan is significant. There are a large number of Egyptians working in Jordan permanently. However, there's not a refugee influx or people seeking asylum in Jordan. So I didn't mean to make a comment on my own opinion about the Arab Revolution, but instead simply to think about the role of Egypt in terms of how Jordan perceives Egypt. With regards to the other countries surrounding Jordan, Egypt is not one of the main concerns.
Okay, so second question by Omer, and then Shrutia Mahmoud, and then yeah. Well, let's do these two first, and then.
Thank you. My question will be for Ms. Shensbergi. I think in the early 2005, there was a public debate, nearly publicized debate, in the Al-Qaeda network on the crucial methods of the time, you know, ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq, was a part of Al-Qaeda. In the Al-Qaeda network, there was a debate which was going on with the letters between Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi, pro-Al-Qaeda idol, and Abu Musa al-Zarqawi. At these days, Maqdisi criticized him harsh about targeting civilians, Shiite civilians, on the civilian targets like markets and the mosques. Zarqawi rejected his criticisms with he softens the jihad, etc. I'm asking today, how do you consider that? Which one inspires most Al-Qaeda's method? The founder of the ISIS movement, Zarqawi, or the most, how can I say, honorable for the Al-Qaeda people, the most popular ideologue, Maqdisi? Which one?
Oh, okay. I'd just like to make a quite, I think, important statement. I did not include ISIS especially because, like, since they have started following a more brutal route, and since they have become, what can I say, more they wanted more than what Al-Qaeda wants, actually. That's why they woke up, and then ISIS started to operate on its own. That's why I said I didn't include that part. Maybe I should have said that at the beginning of my presentation. That would make these more clear and open. I would say, just as I mentioned, the lessons from Iraq, they were so brutal that I think the ISIS, I would say, affected their strategy. That's what I personally think, because that's why they have started to follow different paths. Okay.
Okay, so Jyotia and then Salman, and then we move in this direction.
Thank you very much. Shanice, thank you for your presentation. Could you please tell me what the main difference between Al-Qaeda and IS? The main difference between Al-Qaeda and
I follow the strategies and the path they're following, because ISIS is trying to become even more widespread than Al-Qaeda, and it's like killing people who do not obey their rules and who do not obey by what they're saying. That's what I would say. In terms of, they have the same jihadist ideas. There's trying to establish the rule of Sharia, but ISIS is following a totally more brutal path, and that's what I would say as the main difference.
Thank you, Salman.
Yes. My question is to Michelle.
Oh,
Sorry about
are you close? I mean,
It's okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. Okay. My question is to Michelle. Do you think that having such a large number of Palestinian refugees and Palestinian descendants in Jordan affect their policies towards Israel? If they do so, how?
I think it's difficult to generalize about the overall opinions of each group on Israel, and from an academic stance, I don't have the information to answer your question. However, from my own time in Jordan and my encounters with Jordanians and with Jordanian Palestinians, the majority are very anti-Israel, which is to be expected from the history, as many have suffered under Israeli control. I think that's from personal experiences. Although many Jordanian Palestinians with Jordanian citizenship, no longer now have as strong of a desire to return to Palestine because they have made their lives in Jordan.
You know, Sama, for real.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you, when you talk about the change in tactics of Al-Qaeda, it seems to me they're quite in keeping with other kind of national liberation movements in terms of winning, trying to win over hearts and minds, etc. I think, and there may be operational reasons for changing them over and things like that. But the question I want to ask you is, how successful do you think overall Al-Qaeda has been in terms of what its original goals were, and to what extent do you think they've actually fulfilled them or failed in them?
Actually, with the ISIS operating in the region, I would say they're not as successful as they planned, most probably, because I mean, we can't even talk about Al-Qaeda in the region right now. The whole agenda, the whole, let's say, the whole thing is going around ISIS. Okay, so I don't think they may have until maybe 2013. They may have been successful, but especially this year, I don't think so.
But surely they're responsible for the war on terror, and they're
Yeah.
responsible for the hollowing out of democratic rights.
That's right.
And they're responsible for the fact that Western intervention now is so embroiled that it can't actually get out very quickly. So in terms of actually the strategy of bringing the United States directly into targets, how have they been successful in that in terms of historically what they've done? So I'm not talking about the tactics in terms of right now, but overall, do you think?
Yeah, overall, I can say that I have been successful, but as I have just said a minute ago, like when we focus on now, the picture seems different, but they have been quite successful until 2013. Like maybe until the beginning of 2000, like maybe the midst of 2014 as well.
Thank you, the gentleman with the computer.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Yossi, I am from France, and I was very interested by your presentation about Jordan, because back home in terms of refugee issue, we talk much more about Lebanon, because I guess we got a lot of links with them, and we didn't really talk about Jordan issue. And my question, because I see a lot of similarity between Lebanon and Jordan in concern of the refugee. I want to know, how could you explain why Jordan is so stable, and what are really the assets of Jordan state, and which power back them up, and how they could be so stable and can resist to all those difficulty and issue compared to Lebanon, which is a very stable country.
I think that one of the reasons that Jordan has remained so stable is that Jordan didn't, with the creation of Jordan, there was really no united groups. There were no united ethnic groups. So the group division that you have in Lebanon never really existed in Jordan. In Jordan was mostly Bedouin tribes, and so there was no real sense of unity at all, even when the country was formed. And if you look at the origins of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that Jordan was really created as they needed a space to fill, and they needed land to give to someone to rule. So they created Jordan to divide British and French Middle East. And so I think this origin that there's no groups that are united against each other from the beginning is one of the main roots of stability. Now, of course, you do have, as I mentioned, the West Bank Palestinians and the East Bank Palestinians and the Jordanians somewhat divided. But I think the stability really lies in the fact that there aren't these ethnic stripes within the country from the beginning.
Thank you, Abdurrahman.
I have two questions. I'm actually a graduate of Jordan University. I know that in Jordan, the Jordanians from Jordanian origin actually work at the government, while the Jordanians from Palestinian, or actually they work in business more, or in some. Do you think the diversity is a reason of one of the reasons for the stability in Jordan? Because some might be oppressed, some might be not. So maybe the Palestinians at some point would stand with the government to protect their business interests, or the other side would stand with the government to protect their privileges. My second question is for Shanice. Do you think 10 years from now, maybe 11 September, is Al-Qaeda now smaller or bigger? And you mentioned one of your recommendations, further surveillance, further collection of information, which I disagree with. Do you think that in those 10 years there was more further surveillance and further alliances between intelligence departments, or less? Is this really a solution?
The reason why 9/11 was a failure was because of the problem that they had lacked cooperation between. There was a lack of cooperation between the intelligence agencies within the United States. That was the main reason why they failed to coordinate. Because then, after the September 11 attacks, they reformed the U.S. intelligence community, and then they have shifted to this 16 different agents. So you said that you don't believe that further cooperation.
This led to more successes. The reform in the intelligence.
Yeah, in order to be able to more.
Did it lead to more success because they become more creative and more spread?
That's right. I'm not saying that they're successful. I'm just saying that it just needs to be done. But I'm not saying if they were if they had been successful, then they wouldn't have had these Boston attacks. So I don't believe that they're really doing well. But that was just a recommendation. So they take it or leave it. I don't know.
And to answer your first question, as I mentioned, I think the fact that there's no really long-lasting ethnic divisions is one of the main reasons that there's stability. But also, as you brought up, the fact that there's kind of a division in the role of labor between government and business. I think in some cases that could lead to instability, but in Jordan, because it's been so clearly defined, the division of labor actually does lead to stability, as you suggest. And because the government now especially really wants to maintain stability and doesn't want a lot of protests, I'm sure that this is also influencing the government in ensuring that the Palestinian Jordanians, that the business aspect remains satisfied, so that their needs are being met, that they're being kind of, coddled in the fact, and so that actually the government is using that as a tool to further the stability and to ensure that.
Sure.
Okay. Michelle, you said that from October the 1st there will not any influx of immigrants. So what do you think, do you attribute this to? Like in Turkey, there's a huge influx of immigrants, and we're having problems dealing with them. But in Jordan, you say from October 1st they're not coming. So what do you attribute this to?
So since this is all according to a New York Times article that I found out, so that's my only source.
Your personal opinion, yeah.
But so since October 1st, no Syrians have entered Jordan, although Iraqis are continuing to enter Jordan.
Okay.
So from the article's information and from my own understanding, I think that Jordan is worried about the possibilities of ISIS coming into the country, and so because it's so hard to control who is coming in, they have just stopped.
Okay.
And the article is unclear. Apparently, there are still people coming in, but there's perhaps no documented
Okay.
people coming in or no people being taken as refugees. So it was unclear to me, but I found it very surprising that this extreme measure had not been taken.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
okay.
guess I
Thank you.
have to offer you.
Okay, thank you very much.
We still have time for one question, yes.
If there is no one else.
No one else?
So my question is to Michelle again. We know that Jordan previously cooperated with Israel, while other Arab nations were fighting against it, and that was usually in the case of creation of Israel as a state. What's the current view towards previous Jordanian leadership among Jordanian public, especially among Palestinian refugees? For instance, in the schools, they learn about those facts that Jordan cooperated with Israel, or is it a taboo, or do they learn different things? I was wondering if you have information about that.
I don't have any specific information about the kind of curriculum offered in schools or what children are taught, but I think even if children were taught that Jordan had cooperated with Israel, I think that the sentiments of many parents and grandparents and the people who have vivid memories of coming from Palestine are so strong that this curriculum, even if it exists, would not be significant perhaps to diminish some of the Palestinian Jordanians' animosity towards Israel.
How about the government?
I don't know what the current government stance is. I think right now Jordan is kind of withdrawing from more regional cooperation, and they're looking really much more internally at how to maintain the stability that they currently have. I don't know what the current government stance is on Israel or how that's changed since the Gaza conflict.
Currently refugees view towards government is what I'm trying to mean.
I don't know. Although in Jordan it's also very difficult to voice a lot of disdain for the monarch, for the king. So I don't have no particular. Perhaps you would know from living there.
As you've mentioned, there are Syrian refugees. You'd have to ask new refugees or former refugees or people who came to Jordan and some took citizenship, some did not. So there are many parties. You have to look at it this way. But as maybe today in the last panel, it was mentioned that Jordan is a smaller country compared to Turkey, welcoming like 2 million refugees. So Jordan welcomed like 800,000 refugees or something. Compared to the 6 million of Jordan, sure you have not had really good conditions where refugees actually live. And Jordan itself is not a very rich country. So I think that if you had a statistic or something, it would not be really positive.
Thank you for the additional comment. No problem. Thank you for your attention, for your contribution to the discussion, and I'd like you to join me in thanking our three panelists once again.